we brought together 4 panelists who have different experiences in terms of research, in terms of public engagement, who knew about the Oromo from their experience of research and also a lived experience participating in the movement and so on. The first panelist is our distinguished scholar, Professor Iskel Gabisa. I can't make a justice in explaining and introducing him very well, as you all know. He's one of the few scholars we have in areas of Oromo history, culture, and identity. He researched very well in almost all parts of Oromia and across. And Professor Iskel is a historian in training, an anthropologist, a critical researcher. Currently, he's a professor of African history at Kettering University in the United States. And he will be joining us from Australia, where he is on a work trip. That is why I said we are joining this panel from 3 different time zones. Thank you, Professor Iskel, for even staying very late in the night to make this to join this panel. The second panelist that we have for this conversation is Bonnie Holcomb, whom you also know very well, one of the founding members of the Oromo Studies Association, who has been serving on different positions in Oromo Studies Association as a board member and also with different capacities. But since you know much about Bonnie, I don't have to explain, but I want to underline one very important contribution that Bonnie and her co-author, they co-authored a book, among many of her contributions, I mean, in 1990, which is The Invention of Ethiopia, a Dependent Colonial State. And this book unpacked a very complex historical trajectory, how that empire came into being and how it also sustained. And this is the history the politics and the political economy that we are still grappling with. And I hope many of you might have read that book, and also I suggest that, because although it was written in 1990, still it is very relevant, and Bonnie's contribution is not only that contribution. She is a very active advocate for social justice, for human rights and equality, not only for the Oromo, but for generally marginalized peoples across the world. The third panelist is a young scholar who participated in the Oromo movement, in the Kero movement, and who was also at the early stage of this so-called transition, one of the optimist activists and the politicians who joined the so-called Team Lemma. And after a few years of serving at higher positions in the government, pushed away because of his critical positions and his awareness of how that transition was going away from the expectation. This panelist is Dr. Milkesa Midega. He is currently visiting assistant professor of political science at in the US, and he will also give us his experience not only during the movement but also what happened after that. Finally, I will make a short intervention myself. I'm currently a senior researcher at the University of Zurich in Switzerland, and I don't have to explain much about myself. With this introduction, I'm delighted to invite Professor Iskel Gabisa to make your first contribution. Thank you very much. You are muted, Professor Iskel. Yeah.
Thank you for the generous introduction, and thank you, Oro, for being here. I think this is an important topic, the Oromo protests. And the topic that I gave for my presentation is the Oromo protests and the failure of national integration, multinational federation, and democratization in Ethiopia. I think I could modify the idea of multinational federation as a challenge to multinational federation, but I'm not even sure that this is still in the works. I think the Oromo protests unleashed great energy that was supposed to resolve the problems of national integration and multinational federation and democratization in Ethiopia. When it started, or at least when it seems to succeed in 2018, there were tremendous hope that at least an Ethiopian version of participation, popular participation in politics might succeed. Right now, after 4 years of Prosperity Party rule in Ethiopia, it looks like the prevailing situation in Ethiopia is chaotic, messy, and filled with uncertainties. For the 4th time in 5 decades, hopes for change have been replaced by a hoopla of carnage. Once again, that is. 4 times in 5 decades. The bloodletting in Ethiopia started with the coup d'etat of 1960. That was followed by the massacres of the 1974 revolution. And then that was followed by the carnage of the 1991 regime change. And now the genocide perpetrated by the cabal that hijacked the Oromo protests of 2014-2018. As things stand right now, the spring of hope for democratic transition has now given way to the winter of violence, characterized by war crimes, a reign of terror, state terror, and myriad acts of indescribable cruelty that is bereft of any sentiment of the common humanity that we thought we had. At the roots of all of these conflicts that now has beset Ethiopia and is still besetting Ethiopia is the refusal to allow political participation and the concentration of political power in the hands of an ethnic elite. That is the factor that reinforces centrifugal tendencies. Ironically, this is what makes the long expected and loudly proclaimed unity and indivisibility of Ethiopia an unachievable utopia. So silhouetted against the backdrop of the historic Oromo protest of 2014-2016, I argue in this presentation that the factors that militated against national integration in Ethiopia will remain potent if the demands of the people are not addressed genuinely and comprehensively. Now, this is not the first time that I spoke about the demands of the Oromo protest at the time. We speak in generalities. We speak as elites or educated people that actually articulate the demands of the people. But here what I want to do is to actually use demands, the actual demands that the protesters in prison in that online military camp actually presented to the camp military commanders. Here, it's not a matter of scholarly musing, it's not a matter of scholarly interpretation, but this is actually the presentation of the list of questions by Oromo detainees under the state of emergency at the online military camp. That is what articulates. You all know that, we all know that one of the accusations leveled against Oromo nationalists is that they don't represent the people, that the elites do not have any relationship with the people's demands, that they don't represent anybody. These documents, these are not written by by elites. These are actual questions, list of questions that actually were presented as a demand. So what you will see in the 40 or more questions that I have selected to look at is that the protesters' demands and here I maintain an argument that achieving national integration is contingent upon jumping the hurdles of ethnic domination, corruption, and narcissist political leadership, weak institutions, and lack of will to remain in power. So in my presentation, I posit that for a continued existence, and I don't think this is possible at this point, as I will address very shortly, continued existence of a stable state in that region cannot be guaranteed. If there is any chance for that, there should be a consensual agreement that should be reached by the diverse peoples in those countries. So basically, there are structural problems, but the current demands and the desirability of a social compact can be underlined by in this presentation. So now in Ethiopian politics, as I said, that those who are in power always with the remain in power for the full intention of remaining in power for 1,000 years. That's basically how Ethiopian leaders see themselves. No one, once they are ensconced in power, no one in power in Ethiopia actually thinks that they are human beings that might be removed from power by the intervention of nature. They always designed to remain in power for many, many years. They often, therefore, dismiss the demands of the people as a ploy of a few power-hungry elite. They call it in Amharic, Tikit Sultan Falagioj. This has been the way to dismiss and suppress genuine political demands. It never worked. It didn't help Emperor Haile Selassie to dismiss the warning shots of the coup d'etat of 1960. It didn't help the military government to ignore the military officers' coup d'etat of 1989. And it did not help the EPRDF to infantilize the popular demands of 2015 and 2016. They all lost power because they ignored the demands of the people, blaming it that it is the ploy of the very few angry protesters. Now, what these demands, the list of questions that I have actually show, that demands of the prisoners at the Tolai military camp cannot be dismissed as the demands of a few power-hungry elites. First, it was presented under duress. These protesters were in prison. Second, it was presented by prisoners directly to their tormentors. Third, there is no contact between the prisoners and the alleged external power-hungry elite. And fourth, the prisoners represented a cross-section of the Oromo society. They were representative. Now, I'll just say a few things about the categories of demands. I will not go through the 40 questions that they presented, but the document was smuggled out of the camp and out of the country. Someone smuggled it out, went to India and sent it to me. And I have organized the questions into categories I now think must be taken seriously in addressing popular demands with the view of forging a new social compact. The questions out of 40 questions, 1 to 7 actually deal with accountability. They demand accountability. The questions address the issue of we want a government that is accountable. About 7 questions. The second set of questions deal with the causes of the protest. The causes are economic, political, cultural, and identity-related questions. And in that category, I have about 5 questions. The third category is constitutional rights, that the protesters present themselves as lawful, and they present their demands as constitutional and as legitimate. Under that category, out of the 40 questions, I have about 7 or 8 questions that deal with constitutional matters. And the next one is questions about or demands about the federal structure. What they present is that centralization is a vice, local rule is a virtue. in the Ethiopian context of at that time. And in the fifth category is corruption. The demands address various issues of corruptibility, whether that is in mining or land allocation or appointments to high offices. They talk about economic and political corruption in those questions. And the sixth category is TPLF domination, that the country was really dominated by the elite, the Tigrayan elite, the TPLF elite, in that they direct resources of the country to their own region, and the detainees questioned the legitimacy of that. And finally, there is also an overall question about what Ethiopia means, what Ethiopian identity means. But generally, these are the questions that are in 6 categories that I have collected. Now, at this point in time, this country, Ethiopia, has 2 choices. Either it chooses to address these questions frontally, comprehensively, and genuinely, or the long-awaited and coveted process of national integration will fail, and that's really what seems likely. And the path of failure basically shows that at this point in time, democratization has failed, or maybe national integration has failed in Ethiopia. Democratization has failed. Multinational federation has failed. The only remaining thing what Lencho Lata predicted in some 20 years ago is that the country either decolonizes or democratizes, or it fails at disintegration. And because they have not been able to really even accept the legitimacy of the demands of the people, much less addressing them frontally, that whatever remains for this country is what was predicted about 20 years ago. So basically that is my presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Iskel. You have given us the background and the demand for of that movement, and now we move on. Before going for the general discussion, we move on again with how that movement was culturally rooted, and also what other means of communications in terms of the use employing different strategies in fomenting the movement. And Bonnie will give us some intervention in this regard, and then we move on. And once we make a few conversations in this or interventions, then we open up for discussion. Bonnie. You are muted, Bonnie.
Very good.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Very well. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Happy to see the OSA platform viable and well attended by a large number of members and guests. And I am happy to address what we all consider to be, the pressing issue of the day. Thank you, Iskel, for your presentation of the demands from the grassroots. We are looking at a grassroots movement. From the grassroots, we have an anatomy, and we need to present an anatomy of a nonviolent, pro-democracy youth movement that arose from the margins and moved to the center, that had a very clear, positive agenda, that used indigenous principles to effect, to organize, and to articulate the shortcomings of the system that they were living in, and then was maligned, sidelined, and not destroyed, but stunned. So I think I'm going to present just the broad outlines, but issue this paper as a call for proposing that OSA take up the task of presenting this movement to the outside world, to looking deeply into how it was organized, looking deeply into telling its story, into presenting its champions, into making the world understand the enormous significance of what was a once in a generation and remains a once in a generation movement for change, political, social, economic change. Now, in introducing me, Seba said that I had taken up in the past, a complex historical trajectory and unpacked it in the 1980s when we were trying to understand how could a tiny, relatively small minority continue to dominate a majority people over periods of decades. And that was a difficult, complex trajectory. And I think we're facing now a similar challenge of explaining and spelling out and unpacking and creating a new narrative about what happened in 2014 to 2018. And I think we need to realize that this is not a project that can be carried out by one person. It's not a project that can be carried out by two people or a small team. It's something that's going to need to be collectively conducted and with great collaboration among people from many sectors, many regions, many backgrounds who have a great deal of knowledge about this, but who have not brought it to the public platform. So I'm making a proposal, and let's look at some of the factors. But I think we need to keep in mind that OSA has a protected platform. I mean, one that has been continually available to the community since 1986, that OSA has many people who are gathered around it, and that has access to make relevant study and then to participate in passing those data and those findings into the public sphere to create an understanding and a narrative that can open up the prospects for the movement to participate, and for those who were part of the movement to participate in the future of the country. One of the biggest questions facing Ethiopia from 2011 up to 2014, which was the period after the Arab Spring, was, are the youth of Ethiopia an asset or a liability for the country's future? And the answer came from a rising youth movement, which originated uniquely in the rural areas of Oromia and the surrounding groups, and spread to the cities, relentlessly resisting the policies of an increasingly authoritarian regime in power. They were prepared to become a tremendous asset. And this phenomenon came to be known as the Oromo Protest, or the Kero movement, as we refer to it, after the term for an unmarried young man. The female counterpart is Kare, reference to Kero can be interpreted for both. But they rose with demands that addressed historical inequities. They addressed the inequities that we had laid out and tried to communicate to the world in the book Invention of Ethiopia. These inequities dated back to military conquest of the Oromo, which surprisingly most people engaged in Ethiopian policy and diplomacy have somehow left behind in their memory. But the impact of that conquest was addressed by this movement. The bulk of the population that had maintained a rural agripastoral livelihood, occupying a number of richly resourced and well-watered zones in the Middle Highlands, stretching across Northeast Africa. And their way of life, which recognized the sacred, unbreakable connection between human beings, the water, the land, the trees, the animals, even the pollinators, had created a sustainable manner for large dispersed populations to live on the land. They had produced a huge bounty there. Their resource endowment was enormous. And when they were conquered, this was made accessible to many who came in and settled there to share in that and to try to control it. And for decades, the Oromo people and the people surrounding the Oromo lived on that land, kept a connection to that land, even though their portion was reduced and reduced and reduced. And the youth were demanding to retain access and to benefit from at least a portion of that ancestral endowment. Over the years, they'd been moved off of it. The resources had been confiscated. They demanded access to their cultural and resource rights. They proposed to nurture it and restore it, configuring it in a culturally and socially appropriate manner. They were full of ideas and energy, struggling for something that they were committed to preserve. This was a population. The scale of this movement is also not well understood. The fact that it was a positive movement to preserve and to introduce a model of economics and of justice and, as Scale said, of accountability was linked to the need to retain a livelihood and to have a say over what happened to the ancestral endowment that they were looking to inherit. This was not a minuscule population. From a population of over 40 million who identified as Oromo, full 70% are youth under 40 years old, and some say even under 35. So 70% is a huge population that had been, and even surprisingly now, remains relatively invisible. What they wanted has been addressed. They wanted to have control over their futures, the futures of their people. They wanted an end to the marginalization, and this started with a demand for the end to a policy called the Addis Ababa Integrated Development Master Plan around the city. This movement issued clear calls for access to opportunity, access and security on the land of their ancestors, and they were made with the knowledge that they could build a future in a reconfigured economy. The world does not understand that demand. They wanted decentralized governing structures that were guaranteed, had been guaranteed in the Constitution, but had eroded. They had argued that decentralized governance could support new infrastructures that would allow them to take control of the bounty that their ancestors had created. And they positioned themselves to serve as the country's greatest asset, a fulcrum for leveraging change from the bottom up rather than the top down. Now, we can't go into I can't go into all the dimensions of this because we have, it is complex, and every time we summarize and do overviews, we miss so much. Esebe focused on the fact that I would look at the cultural legacy, and I think it's probably significant to take a single example of how Oromo culture, or maybe a couple or three examples of how Oromo culture played an important role in the movement that rose up from the countryside. They used Oromo culture to communicate. They shared a vision that was communicated through song in traditional forms, girarsa, and protest songs, they characterized the land, they characterized the people, they characterized the inseparability of that and the longing for reconnection. And they struggled and protested to claim what was theirs. They also organized at the very basic level in the household, in the community, appealing to principles of accountability and of solidarity and of respect that go back through the Gade system, which had been the organizing principle at the time of conquest and is revered even to this day in the country and even in urban areas for what it represents and how it organized vast numbers of people in a coordinated republican system. Those principles had at their foundation connection, truth, and accountability. So at the time this movement began, there was a process which was called the 1-to-5 system. It was a form of authoritarian control that a minority group, the TPLF was a minority controlling the government, and they had gone beyond the Constitution to instill various levels of surveillance and punitive enforcement down into the household. If you have a household, in Oromia, most families are larger than 5, but a 1-to-5 system, Tokoshene, was in place. And what had happened in the preparation for the protests and calling for a new configuration was that the reports were that this power was undone. As the movement grew, the youth used Oromo principles of solidarity to loosen, to shame, to threaten, to ensure that they overcame this reporting and this punitive spy network that had been powerful in dividing and making the people fearful of one another. The success of the youth movement was closely connected to breaking that power. They persuaded that, and the community agreed to cooperate with them by not reporting to the government system, to depend on one another instead, and to step out and assume that this was stronger than what could happen to them as a result of defying the government. They agreed not to tell who attended the protests or who helped to block the roads. When they were successful in this, they were able to expand the organization, and the communities understood. The Oromo Protest, the youth protests, had the support of communities. They supported them in the face of these TPLF authorities. So the Gosa family and community structure stood behind the youth. And if cadres were found to direct government agencies to individuals or report them out, these people would be shunned, isolated. They'd be told that no one would attend their funeral. They would be denied burial through the Idder. They would, in other words, the society closed ranks using cultural sanctions to stand behind the Kero. So the rural movement was empowered by the fact that they provided, this connection with each other. And I think that probably most of you in this meeting know that the power of the civil disobedience was linked to the bulk of commodities that were sent from the rural areas into the center. It highlighted the dependency of the urban areas on the communities that had been forced to send most of what they produced rather than enjoy it themselves. And they pointed this out. They made these acts very visible and felt by the urban communities, and ultimately through that many means of solidarity, they were able to succeed. Now, when they were able to bring a change it was measured in the resignation of a sitting prime minister in January of 2018. The protests went on from 2014, the exposure of the master plan, 15, 16, 17. By 2018, this movement was felt. They had within the country, but there was not much international attention to what was going on behind the scenes, what was going on in this. So when the prime minister resigned and the party scrambled to respond, they took the demands of the Kero, and the party ended up spending, Melchizedek can tell us exactly the number of days. I think it was 17 days of intense negotiation with each other to come with a reform agenda, and then to find a prime minister to promise to carry that out and fulfill the term of the current prime minister who just resigned. This is when the world started to pay attention to what was going on in Ethiopia. And the change, the political opening, a set of reforms that was very attractive and intended to be part of international messaging and stage managed politics, caught the world's attention. And most of what the Kero accomplished was credited to Abiy Ahmed, who was selected as the prime minister. We now, looking back, see the steps that Abiy Ahmed took, but the most, and Melchizedek is going to focus on that, but the most telling is that the steps were basically not, were set in place to move the Kero movement to the side, to sideline, to raise questions, to malign the reputation, and ultimately to basically decimate, attack, vilify, and detain in massive numbers, murder, and try to depict the young people and the youth of Ethiopia as a liability rather than an asset. By treating them as a liability, by publicly referring to them as pestilence, as the kind of pest that will come and eat your crop like locusts. If you don't kill them, they were going to kill you. So you have to, in order to protect yourself, you have to beat back these undisciplined young people. The steps by which that happened is something that we need to spell out and make the world understand together. But the fact that the narrative shifted to malign the Kero is a very significant fact in the international narrative right now. And our challenge is to understand clearly and to spell out clearly for public access what this movement actually consisted of, what its goals were, why and how it was set aside, and how it needs to be brought to the public in its positive aspects. I'm sure many of you are not do not watch prize fights, but in a fight when an opponent goes down, there's a period in which it's determined whether he's been stunned, is kind of temporarily disoriented, or whether he's what they call down for the count. Is he knocked out? Is he not to rise again? We are in a period of time in which it remains to be seen whether the movement itself is stunned and will rise up and move on, or down for the count. And I think we can very much make the case that this huge cohort of young people who coordinated so effectively and who were so determined and sacrificially fought for the well-being of their people are not going to go away. They are not going to be able to be considered as a liability for the duration. We've watched Ethiopia for many years, and we've often said how long can a minority control a majority? How long can this happen? Well, there are a lot of reasons that we've unpacked in other writings and analysis that authoritarianism has its supporters, but those who fight for freedom and justice have their supporters too. And as we heard yesterday in what I thought was an extremely effective and helpful panel where we got honest feedback from a person who's actually involved in information warfare and fighting disinformation, he supported this notion that this panel had discussed earlier, that telling this story with a steady drumbeat of positive messaging through which could be fueled by Oromo Studies Association project to bring concrete information about the Oromo movement can provide what is needed for any activist, advocacy, human rights groups, churches, organizations to tell this story in a way that makes the international community look to see that behind Abiy is not a void. They look right now and don't see anything, any possibilities behind the current configuration. And they are asking seriously, what is next? What can happen? What is an avenue to stability? And I think as an association and as many scholars who are committed to the well-being of all the peoples of Ethiopia, the largest of which is the Oromo, there is a clear avenue to stability from crisis by taking seriously and respecting and building on the assets of a movement that has shown its hand, but has been hidden, shuttered, imprisoned, maligned, and with the hope that they will stay there. They will not stay there, and we have a very significant role to play. Now, the proposal, I think Ezeba will pick up my specific proposals for running and organizing a collection, a research project, basically, in which people who are willing to participate can help in translating of all kinds of messaging that was passed and positive among Oromo and among the community, and the songs we've started to we have translated Hachalu songs and Hawi Tazaro's songs, that talk about this sacred link with the land and talk about aspects that the world needs to understand. We are in a very interesting time, not just for the Horn of Africa, but for the world at large. We've watched so many authoritarian regimes emerge, and we are bringing to light a movement that actually provides an answer to the world's question of how do we relate to the land? How do we relate to people? How do we build a sustainable presence on the earth at a time when we need to protect what we have, where we need to keep the water clean, keep the forests going, keep the animals alive, to figure out how we can live without destroying the very earth we live on. The Oromos did that, created bounty. The youth want to tap into that vision that is part of their ancestral vision and their sacred commitment. And if we can get that messaging out and show what they were doing, we have a lot of potential allies. Our friend yesterday says, get allies. Let's tell the stories. Let's coordinate, do the research, tell your own story if you were involved in any part of the country in this movement, and begin to support each other in creating a new reality and bringing the potential partners to the table to speak for themselves, or to make international allies who will make sure that they get there. We have a lot of discussion coming later in the day, closing with a discussion specifically about national dialogue, how we would relate to that, how these people who made this change would be represented there. All are open questions. We have a complicated story to tell, but this problem is not going to go away unless it's not going to go away. So we have a role to play as scholars, as activists, and as people who are committed to the well-being of all. So the challenge is let's put together a serious research project, and let's collaborate with the advocates and the activists and the organizers who want to shift that narrative and change the public narrative about this region and about this movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny, for very detailed explanation about the cultural roots of the movement and also how complex it is in telling our stories, how challenging it has been also for the youth to move forward. As you said, it has been challenging, and then it requires much effort. That is also where I will make a short intervention. I play now a double role as a moderator and also presenter, but I will not take much time of the presentation. But just to make a connection, Professor Iskel mentioned about the demands of the youth movement, what causes were there, underlying causes. Bonnie also mentioned how those causes were culturally rooted. But my short intervention will be more of what were the mechanisms that fomented that movement, what cultural mechanisms, social mechanisms, and also in terms of technology, how did the youth maneuver the existing platforms. I make a very short presentation. Yeah, so this is what you all know about the movement, and I will not go to the history of the movement, the details of the movement and so on. But the question is, what did it bring? We said it is a once in a generation movement that brought, at least it sparked the light of freedom, not only in the minds of the youth, but also in the Oromo entirely. It also brought the idea of emancipation from that historical or historically rooted injustices since the birth of that empire. And also the question was related to sovereignty in the sense that it is not related to that state sovereignty, but also sovereignty to the resource, sovereignty of the people over their knowledge, over their ancestral land. The question to decide what they have or what affected their lives. And it was also the movement, we said we didn't unpack it through empirical research very well. And that is the assignment that every one of us have. It, on the one hand, it unveiled the socio-economic and the political injustices, the oppression that has been going on for long, historically and contemporarily by the period. But it also displaced this dominant narrative of the period, but because Ethiopia was presenting itself as one of the fast-growing countries in the world, what they were presenting as a double-digit growth and so on. But it showed that when this mass of youth protested against the regime, it brought that the so-called development of that period was a fake or it was at least a development and a growth for only a few elites who were benefiting from the system. It also showed this a kind of selective historical narrative of Ethiopia itself. You know, in Ethiopia, glories were appropriated by those who were writing the history, and agonies were concealed, or they were silenced. The pain of people, of the victims, of those who were subjugated, has never been told in the history. But whenever there is a glory, a victory, then that was taken into the history, but not by those who made the history or the glorious victory, but those who could write that narrative were appropriating. We know this in the history of Ethiopia. Very important, what I would like to mention, and what is still very significant, is also in Ethiopian history, the center-periphery relation has been very dominant in shaping the political discourses. The center has been the one which was deciding on the periphery in terms of land, in terms of economy, in terms of politics whatsoever. But this one shifted in two ways. The first one is the Oromo youth came up with a very fundamental political economic question, which was land. And as a dependent colonial state, as a predatory state that was built on issues related to land, questions that was touching the issue of land was not only economic question, it was not only question of property, it was a political question, and that was the one which shaped the entire political spectrum of the country. On the second aspect, protests and uprisings in Ethiopia were considered to be something in the periphery, in the bush, in the forests, when there were armed struggles and so on. Until 2016 and part of 2017, when the roads were blocked, until those people in the urban settler societies felt the economic impact of the Oromo protest. They were not even very much aware, and they didn't give much attention to what was going on either in the western part of Oromia or in the eastern part in the south. But in around 2016, 2017, the protest was no longer a distant question. It was just in their backyard, because they couldn't get access to the onions, the tomatoes, the cereals whatsoever. So they felt that it was no longer a periphery, but it was a center. And the question was also the question of becoming part and parcel of the decision making or the self-rule in that particular or broader sense. So we need to understand this. I'm not telling this as historical past, but it is significant resonates still today. We are saying it was a non-violent movement, but what were the basic tenets of that non-violent movement? We should appreciate the role of the Kube generation. We call it the Kube generation, but what does it have? It was not only a language. It was Afan Oromo was not only a language, but it also ingrained the notions of identity. Those youths learned in their vernacular language. They learned about their culture, about their identity, about their history, in a way that they could easily understand. That was how they became a conscious generation. A conscious generation in terms of what was happening in terms of land grabbing. It was also the generation that became conscious on the one hand in terms of unemployment, about political lack of political freedom, and particularly they were going back into the history, because in the songs, as Bonnie mentioned before, in the songs, if we analyze much of the songs from 2014 or 2015 until today, even after 2018, until very recently. It was our artists are going back into history. They are bringing back and connecting the historical subjugation of the Oromo to the present marginalization and oppression. And these notions of nonviolent movement were also culturally rooted. They were within the Oromo wisdom, within the Gada system. Is not something. Democracy, equality, and these notions of democratic rights are not something that states in the modern sense would grant, but it is part of what this youth grew up with. They learned from their parents. They also became more conscious in terms of the global dynamics. So that helped the movement to create solidarity among themselves and among others. I will be putting that. So I mentioned in the introduction that it was the question of centering the causes of the Oromo in many ways. It was a rural-based, but that rural-based movement touched on a very fundamental political economy of the country, which is land. And when issues of land come, it was also the question of economy, culture, identity. You know this motto about Lafti Kenya, Lafe Kenya. That was not only a question that people would say, okay, once we don't have land, then there is no economy. It was beyond that. So the movement was. They were very pragmatic in using all existing possibilities and resources in order to create solidarity among themselves and solidarity among with other nations, including, for example, like the Sidama. They were using symbols. Symbols are very strong, strong markers of identity, of determination, and so on. Songs are, as we know, the songs that were released during those periods were very, very provocative. They were touching. The use of the technology also makes the use that they were capable of using the existing platforms like the social media, Facebook, YouTube, and so on the one hand, but at the same time going back into their culture and implementing different social sanctions, market boycotts. They knew the delicate parts of the regime. So that is how they were able to weaken both the economic and the political resources of the regime by that time. However, as Bonnie mentioned before, it didn't go as it didn't get the attention it was supposed to get. Mischaracterization of the youth went on from the very beginning, how the regime was characterizing that as a gangs, as a violent gangs, and so on. Although the opidio of that period and for a brief period, the latter ODP tried to appropriate and also acknowledge the role that the Cairo played in bringing that transition. It didn't take them much time to label them again as violent gang and so on. So they joined the other groups in distancing, disenfranchising, and putting many of the youth movement leaders in jail. Many were arrested and killed and so on. And we know also different international organizations were taking the narrative, the dominant narrative, particularly that was propagated by the Amhara and the other urban elitist groups, and today including the party on power, like the minority rights group report, as we know, in 2020, not 2022, sorry. So they were characterizing the Cairo movement as, or the Cairo in general as gangs and violent and so on. So this is what is expected from us, either in terms of writing through scientific reports or through advocacy, telling the truth and telling the story as it was. So minor remarks that I would make is this movement was part of a broader youth bulge in Africa, which is becoming increasingly conscious of authoritarianism, inequality, and exploitation. And many of Africa's youth in different parts of the continent are also experiencing and becoming critical of such issues. And I mentioned about the Kube generation, what the generation or what the Kube played. On the one hand, they became conscious, and on the other hand, they were becoming very conscious of the exploitative and the repressive system. And but they also determined to fight, to struggle for the self-rule and the dignity of their people. So although, as Milkesa will be presenting later, although the movement was hijacked and the expected result was not as we all expected to, but it brought at least different success in terms of creating solidarity within the Oromo, in terms of bringing at least some level Oromo issues to the international community, international media, and so on. Different newspapers, including the Guardian, for example, reported how the youth were the ones who were behind this toppling the authoritarian regime and so on. My call to scholars on Oromo studies in general is to be determined to study the depths and the breadth of the movement, to bring to the world how that nonviolent movement unfolded and what challenges the youth faced, and what possible in the future, as Iskel also said before, unless those demands are addressed, there is no question that would the conditions for such movement is still there. So I think with this, I will end up my talk, and then we go to Milkesa's presentation, particularly focusing on what went wrong and how did it go wrong around since 2017, 2018, and what is the status of the youth currently. Milkesa.
Thank you, Rasab. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank you, you and the OSA leadership in general, because they invited me to speak on this very respected Oromo platform. It was my hope, has been my hope to speak on such very huge occasion, and thank you all. And for me, because I'm speaking after Professor Scale, after Bonnie, and after you, so it looks I have to summarize what you've said. I have a little bit of presentation, if I can share with you. Oops. So can you see it?
We can hear it. We can see it, but if you could make a full screen.
Is that full screen now?
Yeah.
Thank you. So my title is Catastrophic Victory: How Politics of Betrayal Against the Oromo Youth Thwarted Democratic Transition in Ethiopia. So I have a content to be presented here. So let me start with the introduction. This paper presents a first-hand account of how the Kero Kare Nonviolent movement fell into the wrong hands that betrayed it, employed violence and terror against its leadership, its structure, and its organization. So, well, you may ask, who are you to speak such issues? I have to respond in such a way that I grew up in Oromo student protest and activism from my high school age all the way to university. And also I was senior government and ruling party official from 2017 to 2020. Therefore, already the demands of the youth movement was outlined in an excellent way by Professor Skill, and the cultural roots and the overall implication of the movement and the assignments were already covered by Bonnie, and already a survey has covered the mechanisms that were employed by the youth and the culture and the songs. I focus on the ruling party's decisions and implementation mechanisms, how that victory turned into catastrophe. So for the methodological and theoretical purpose, I have gone through some materials, and I asked questions such as, how can a historic victory become a catastrophe for the victor? So I'm not going to present about this large documents and successful nonviolent movements of the 20th and the 21st centuries. And also I have tried to compare Egypt and Ethiopia because they share extensive similarities. They were successful but hijacked nonviolent movements. So I directly go to respond to the question, how Oromo Youth Movement fell into the wrong hands that betrayed it, employed violence and terror against its leadership, its informal structure and organization. Number one comes to this quote: "Arrow carries Ethiopia cross." This is not my word. That is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia's word. This was the perception of the Prime Minister about the Oromo youth before April 2018. In one of our meetings, he had to consciously or unconsciously say, real power comes from Ethiopia, not from Cairo. Cairo can help us reach there, but it cannot crown us. So the question is, did he ever supported, advocated Cairo movement? The answer would be largely no, but there is also yes part. The yes part is about, because he saw the movement as a ready-made to be exploited. So he systematically and tactically joined the Team Lama, and then finally he appropriated, manipulated, you can say, instrumentalized the movement, and he robbed the foot of the movement totally. So he says the labor to carry him to the palace was from the Cairo array, and the legitimacy of anointing, comes from Ethiopia. The Ethiopia we are talking about is not the country, it is the ideology, it is the institution, the establishment that crowns. So he continues to say, and Ethiopia in bull to non-bita, meaning said, I'm not going to govern or administer Ethiopia, I will reign over it. This bita is not, no, we don't have an Oromo vocabulary to bitu. It is a colonial term that he brought us from Magzad, or, it's colonization. So the second issue to come is Lamma Magarsa's 40-60 political principle. In late 2017, this idea came because they suspected the old cadres in Oromia. They said if the TPLF arrest, particularly Lama said, if TPLF arrest me and Abi and reinstate Mukhtar Kadir or Aster Mamu, then the old cadres will readily accept them and run the state in Oromia. Therefore, the solution they recommended and they did, they started to implement was to mix the Oromia government with a formula of 40% from Kero Kare and 60% from old cadre. So with this, the idea was Kero is not going, Kero was not suspected of siding or aligning with TPLF. Therefore, Kero was a reliable promoter of Oromo cause. So the youth are not going to betray them, but they suspect the old cadres. Therefore, they try to mix this with this formula, and we remember Lama ordered Oromia police to side with the Oromo youth and he forbade not to shoot the youth anymore. However, this formula failed, particularly after Lama's unceremonious removal from power. And this formula was particularly counterproductive against Kero at the end of the day, because it divided the Kero into government Kero and the popular Kero. Kero Mataki, Kero Motuma. This concept of division came into place, and the security forces and the intelligence agents pushed to widen the suspicion between these two divisions. And third one is very important one, the Burayu incident. The Burayu incident, as we all know, happened on September 16. What is it? September 15, 2018, the OLF leadership returned to Ethiopia. And in the morning, September 16, a violent attack orchestrated against non-Oromo residents in Burayu town. Then why did that happen? But as an internal person, and I was a senior cabinet member of Oromia government at that time, and I was member of the Oromo Democratic Party's Central Committee at that time. I was also assigned to calm down the problem by traveling to Arbanij, the capital city of Gamo community at that time. Particularly, it was the Gamo community living in Burayu town who were targeted at that time. Why did that happen at that time, on that day? Then I have asked also security and intelligence people at that time, and what I conclude and I'm convinced that it has three purposes. Number one was to unleash a defamation campaign against the image of the youth. Already the image of the youth that Barney and the other Asabi also raised about the ethics and the nonviolence ethics and the standards. Oromo youth was governed by the extremely high ethical standard and care while they accomplished this much success. So it was the beginning, the official beginning of a campaign. and a war campaign, defamation campaign against them. And the second was a reaction to the massive welcoming made to the OLF. You know, with OLF returned to Ethiopia, the youth across Oromia turned out, I mean, they attended the welcoming made to the OLF in Finfinne, Addis Ababa. And that was a shock news to Abiy and his allies, particularly the Mossabat, now rebranded as Zema. They were not happy about that attendance. So the OLF was received with this violence. So the third one is also, there is also a purpose, which is within the government. The purpose was to accuse Lamma of incapability to govern the anarchy. They say, quote unquote, anarchy. Well, they are accusing the Cairo as an anarchic entity, but Cairo has never been anarchic and it fought against anarchy, in fact. So the Burayu incident is very important in that it is a turning point against the Cairo nonviolent movement. The fourth one is we saved Ethiopia from disintegration already. We saved Ethiopia from disintegration already. Just following the Abiy's control of the state power in Ethiopia, the ODP produced a document that the Central Committee took and dispatched it to zones and cities to give training to the public, the youth, the civil servants, and party members. That the document says ODP saved Ethiopia from disintegration. And that within that, just literally, when you read ODP saved Ethiopia from disintegration, it could mean that ODP saved Ethiopia from TPLF. But the reality was not that. In the document, it emphasizes that, particularly, it accuses the Oromo youth of violence and secessionism. It also appeases those who advance the politics of saving Ethiopia from the Oromo. So, there are groups who always want to hear the idea of saving Ethiopia from the Oromo. So the document, on the one hand, accused the Oromo nonviolent, youth movement as secessionist, destructive forces. On the other hand, it has goal of appeasing. And that document, it says, "Siyasa boichara, siyasa moichati sisu jal kamera." We've started to transform the youth from victim politics from victim politics to victorious mentality. Kind of transforming from victimhood or inferiority politics to the victorious mentality. And they say in the document, siyasa mogara walakat finna, fidajir raja. Meaning we are, changing from the mind of the youth from peripheral politics to the center, from bringing from the periphery to the center. Peripheral politics for them is about secessionism, about nationalism, then about central. The center is about owning the Ethiopian state and governing it. So it accuses basically the narrative of we saved Ethiopia from disintegration, as the document implies, there is an accusation against the youth movement. And the fifth one is eliminating opponents to form a one-party state in Oromia. This happened in late 2018 on ODP's decision. It was an ODP's decision. By this time, no one would suspect ODP because it is late around November or December 2018. At that time, people were, we were in honeymoon, even no one would suspect. But the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, has already planned his way. So in that meeting, Central Committee meeting, he said, we should learn from the TPLF. It ruled Tigray for over 27 years without any opposition, especially from within the region. The OTP should run or rule Oromia as TPLF had been ruling Tigray. We should also learn from Tigray, no opposition at all. And if the worst comes, Ethiopia can move on without election. So the idea of creating a one-party state in Oromia had started by late 2018. And the sixth and dangerous decision was about this. It happened in June of 2019 on the meeting of the ODP Central Committee. I attended. Then it was Kero was seen as a deadly threat, and party's decision to decimate Seli Dina. So the document that was presented to us put Kero at the very top of the list of potential enemies that the document listed. Potential enemies. Number one was listed Kero. So after that party's decision, well, in the party's meeting, there's no position. You can raise ideas, but it would be unanimously decided. So following this party's direction, Ethiopia's state-run media opened series of propaganda campaign against the Kero. You all remember a poem read by a woman on the eve of the 2019 Ethiopia's New Year. It characterized, the youth, Oromo youth, as manga, and they demonized. Actually, this dehumanization started by the Prime Minister himself on this June 2019 decision of the party. So that was cascaded down to media, and the officials of government to use terms and to label Aero. They translated this manga as Grisa. So you remember when they say Grisa, whom they are referring. And so following that decision, the party, particularly the party, when I say party, it was the ODP at that time, established a special command post within the party's office. That special command post coined a code name, Seli Dina, enemy cell, just to refer to Kero. So this special command post will coordinate the campaign and the war against Seli Dina, meaning the Kero, the youth, nonviolent youths. And also this term, Shane was Shane and Seli Dina were used interchangeably. Shane was just referring to OLF in general and Ola, and even you can expand your definition of Shane just to accuse anybody who is Oromo nationalist. So even myself was because at that time I was a Central Committee member, and I had part of the problem. I have to admit that I have already asked pardon for the damage that I have or might have brought to people or organizations, because I was at that time part of the system, and I don't claim I was free, and I actually committed problems. So for that matter, I have asked apologies, and still I have asked senior intellectuals here, and my apologies. So Um, after these decisions, zones and cities were authorized to take any measure. Any measure means within the party, it includes extrajudicial executions and, disappearances and, legal detentions. They say, akagot and goda, just don't detain, don't, tell me you arrest of somebody, just akagot and goda, meaning do whatever you want. That was how the zonal administrators and cities were authorized to kill extrajudicially. And as part of this movement, the plot to assassinate Jawar Muhammad in October 2019 was not a new thing. It was part of the label that Aero was a deadly threat. So it was part of the Akagotan Godawa. It's part of, forming a one-party state in Oromo. So particularly after the plot to assassinate Jawar Muhammad, the National Intelligence and Security Service formed secretive agent groups against Cairo and Arab. And, these secretive agents were counter-revolutionaries, and they agitate and they wreak havoc, and they mislead youths, and they have succeeded in part in different areas in Shashamane, in part of RC. They have attacked in Adama, in Dredawa, the Sarsawi, the Satanau, the Matohaya, they have different names. So we don't have time to discuss everything. So the seventh and the last one is killing Hachalu as killing the spirit of youth movement. Yes. In March 2020, the Central Committee of the Prosperity Party passed two decisions. Still, I was a member of that. These two decisions include, one was how to effectively manipulate the COVID-19 pandemic shock to eliminate all competing forces, armed and unarmed. And the second was how to postpone election for one more year. Then the two agendas were, extensively discussed and unanimously passed. Following this decision, an extensive crackdown, including extrajudicial killings, widespread in Oromo. Hachalu was assassinated within 3 months of this horrific Central Committee of the Prosperity Party's decision of how to using COVID-19 as a window of opportunity. And Hachalu's assassination was not his assassination alone. Many youth were brutally gunned down within hours. They lost their, their icon, their representative, and Abiy used this incident as a pretext to further crack down on all remaining youth leaders in opposition in Oromo. The killings and the widespread arrests. Above all, the ultimate goal was to create terror and panic among the youth, meaning killing the spirit of the youth movement, not to conduct nonviolent movement anymore, to establish or re-establish authoritarian culture. That was the purpose of killing such high-profile Jalu Lesa, because it has implication over his supporters. He was seen as a leader and top figure of the Cairo. So, in my conclusion, due to this series of party decisions and mechanisms that they employed, many have been extrajudicially executed, legally held in detention centers. Many have disappeared. Some had considered to leave the country, and many have in fact joined the OLA. And also, still there are many youth who remain loyal to nonviolent means of resistance and thus prefer to hibernate, waiting for an opportune time. Examples could be raised. The October 2021 protests on Recha Day in Finland. The protesters are the funeral service of artist Noho Governor in January 2022 in Adama. The recent Addis Ababa University student protest in early March 2022 and others. These all indicate that the massive crackdowns and campaigns to bury Oromo Youth Movement was not successful. It means that the possibility of nonviolent youth movement is not closed. Thank you very much, Galatoma.
Okay, thank you, Milkesa, for this very insightful presentation. That is also why we needed the insider information, data, and so on. This is very, as I said, insightful. You gave us how beyond what many of us know from a distance. So thank you very much. I think I would not now go for other questions from my side to the panelists, but because of time, I will directly go to give the chance to the audience to ask questions. And in the service of time, it is good to give some 3 questions first, and then we proceed that way, rather than going one by one. So the first, okay, I will take the first 3 questions. Moa, Bahar, and Mosisa. I think I should make them.
So can I go ahead now?
Oh, okay, you can. I thought if it is not possible. Okay, yeah, you can go ahead, Mo.
So thank you, Milkesa, for sharing this very important information and help us understand the minds of this evil person called Abiy. So my question to you is, you said one of Lemma's proposition was a 40-60 ratio of bringing the Kero into the leadership. Is there any plan? Do they know who are these leaders of Kero, or what was their plan, how to integrate them into that? So that's my first question. The second question is surrounding assassination attempt against Jawar Mohammed. So I think this is some new information. There's so many things that was going on. So given his relationship with ODP, Abiy, Lemma, and so on, many people are thinking this is probably another plot. So can you shed more light on that? If that was, and also I think it would be nice or helpful if you have more information around the assassination of Hachalu. Was that something decided in the Prime Minister's office or their office to carry out this assassination? Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Let's proceed to the second question, Bahar.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Asabe, for giving me a chance, and thank you to panelists for a wonderful presentation. I have 2 short questions. The first one is for the panelists, but the other one is like an open-ended question for the audience to explore on. The first question is, I think most of the presenters made justice in focusing how the regime hijacked the revolution or the movement, but I think we have to also focus on how we, as a movement supporter, as participant, somehow failed in leveraging the movement. In my view, because the movement was non-violent, so as a non-violent, we did good in, there are 3 part of the non-violent. One is the destruction of the authoritarian power. We did good in that, but in constructing our own structural power, I think we didn't do well at that. Given that, as Mutesa said, if the gate of nonviolence is not closed, one lesson we learned from that, from building or constructing our own power to protect our gains and to influence decision making. The open question, ended question that I would bring for the audience and for the panel to wonder is, I think it's high time as an intellectuals and as intellectual and the public leaders in Oromo to make a decision regarding the what I call, for the want of term, duality in a quest of Oromo demand for state building. Are we after like building our own state in our own imagination, or are we for sharing the state in which our own image and imagination interest is reflected and recognized and respect? I think the debate on the duality, I don't want to repeat the terms that were overused, somehow repetitive, but how do you view this? Is it not a time to make a clear-cut decision? Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Moses.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful presentation, all the panelists. I have one question sent to me from Dr. Berasa Tadese. I will simply read. It was for Dr. Milkesa Midaga. I will simply read the question. He couldn't attend the panel until the end, so he sent me this question to ask on his behalf. I quote, transparency is the first order of a scholar. Can you please kindly and honestly detail for OSA audience to what extent you were involved in the human rights abuse of the Oromo people, selling and leasing their lands and evicting and displacing them from their homes, etc., and ask for forgiveness? That was a question, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Milkesa for your bravery to leave that government. It is my opinion that you should not have been intelligent person like you should not have been in the Opidio in the first place. But for you to leave required a bravery and to join the fight for democracy and justice. I have a couple of questions of my own. The first question of mine is to Dr. Iskeel. It seems like you avoided, unlike the other panelists, you seem to have avoided the term Kero in this presentation. I wonder if this is intentional. I found this to be interesting, given the fact that the Oromo movement was late, Oromo Protest. You named it a Oromo Protest, which is right. The Oromo Protest was led by Kero. So can you comment on that? That's my first question. And then my second question is for any of the panelists to comment if they like, which is you said, all of you said, the Kero movement or the youth movement or the Oromo Protest, whatever it is, was hijacked by the Abiy government, especially by the Abiy himself, as Dr. Milkesa put it rightly. So what mistakes were made by the leaders of the movement, by the activists? I know that many activists at the beginning openly supported the Abiy regime. they may have made, I feel that they may have been used as a tool to put him, to make him stay in power, pacify the Kero movement. And they even, some of them even went to the extent of disarming OLA or WABO. So I want to reflect on this, what mistakes were made, what happened, and what could have activists, Kero leaders and others, what could have they done? What happened? So if
thank you, Dr. Moses. I think for many people are waiting. So I think we got to your question. I will not go. I will not give you much time for further question because
I'm done.
time.
I'm done. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now the first round, I will, because of the questions asked, many of them referring to Milkesa. Milkesa, would you please take the session to respond to those questions?
Thank you all for giving much attention, and I think I'm successful in provoking ideas and thoughts and reflections. So when I briefly react from the last question that was read by Mosisa, and I have admitted that I was part of the system from 2017 to 2020, during which time I was part of the group. I was instrument of the regime. I have admitted that, and I have asked apologies. But when I woke up and that we were wrong, but at that time things have already slipped out of our hand, and I decided not to continue as instrument of the new dictatorship. So that was, I didn't prefer to continue to be an instrument of that regime. And about the Lama's proposal of 4060, well, at that time I was head of Oromo Youth and Sport Affairs Bureau, and I was assigned to recruit youths in Oromo array to be integrated into the government. And for the question, do you know who these arrows were? And well, it was the government structure who targets the key arrow figures and identify them, particularly at the Borada or ANA level, district level. So we've succeeded in training about 10,000 members of Kero Array in Adama. From that, only about a quarter of what we trained have integrated into the government at different levels of government in Oromia. But I said it was counterproductive rather than it didn't give hope to the youth. And about the plot to assassinate Jawar and the assassination of Hajalu, as far as I'm concerned, I was at that time, member of the Central Committee of the ODP, and I have some access to confidential informations. So they have tried to assassinate Jawar, and however, he was active and he appealed quickly to the public, and he aborted the plan. But Hajalu could not abort that plan, and he passed away from us. So that was what I want to say.
Thank you, Melchesa. I think further questions might come, and then we will proceed with the questions. But unfortunately, because it is late in the night, around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in Australia, Professor Scale has already left because he couldn't stay very longer. So he wrote me that he had to, because he will be also traveling tomorrow. So I think we apologize for missing him, and we could not answer questions related to him. Just a word about the question about he didn't mention Cairo. I cannot speak on his behalf, but I think what he presented was as if it was the demands of the prisoners, and the prisoners he considered were not only the Kairos. I think that could be the reason, but there could be other platforms where we can get clarification why he didn't use the term Cairo. That was the way I understood. There is another question about what mistakes were made by activists, by politicians during that. I think that was that's the question for all of us. But as we know, many were optimists. They joined that team, either directly or indirectly supporting that the transition would lead to what was expected. Only very, very few remained persistent and firm with their position. So I think that was a mistake, and that was the price that we are paying now. So I think that is what I could say. Bonnie, is there anything that you would comment?
Yes, thank you. It's a good question, Mosisa. And I think that there are many dimensions to a nonviolent struggle. And it's not just those who are going to lay down their lives and to expose themselves in order to expose the contours of the regime. But it is those of us who are in the audience and in the wider community who have a responsibility to make their sacrifice known. Because the objective, one of the objectives of a nonviolent movement, as Martin Luther King pointed out very, very clearly and very effectively, and others have written, is that when you are unarmed, you are pricking the conscience of those who see and who observe the realities that you are exposing. And your purpose is to instigate them, to motivate them to take action on your behalf in the cause of justice. So in our case, when I say our, I mean those of us who are wanting to communicate the concern, communicate the messaging, and depict those who made these sacrifices as the heroes that they were. We did not have strong enough institution. We did not have a strong enough consciousness about what was actually required to bring them to the public, to make allies for them, to help to find people who will defend them. We're still in that position. We have to build up the capacity to get their case, our case for justice, in front of the international community. And then we will have honored what they are doing on the ground, and we will have exposed what they are up against. So that's the aspect of going with this. And if it is not well coordinated, if it is not done consciously, if it is not sustained, if it is not continuous, they sacrifice without an audience and without those who will step in to intervene, to protect, and to change the system to improve it.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Now we go to the next round of questions, but because of shortage of time, we will not proceed further questions as I'm getting from the coordinators. So we will take only one question from the following three individuals, Professor Mekuria Bulcha first, Professor Guluma Gamada, and Workine. Please, your question very briefly, and then we respond to that, and we should move to the next panel. That is what I'm getting from.
Asabet, could I say something? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, because the following panels also related, we will ask the current panelists to remain and take questions. We would like the panelists to go in and begin their presentation and then take questions, because the question is going to be related to the movement. Therefore, if the presenters are ready, they should be introduced and brought back. And then the current panelists should remain and take more questions after the presentation with the current panelists.
Yeah, understand that, but I think let me proceed with the three individuals I mentioned, and then we move to that one. Professor Mekuria. Professor Mekuria. Agesu. Okay. Dr. Gluma.
I'm sorry. Okay, you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the presenters, and also would like to thank Dr. Milkesa and welcome him to OSA. I congratulate him on the courageous decision that he has taken to dissociate himself from the government that he had served briefly. Saying that, I actually, if I had the time, I had some comments, but since I think we are pressed with time, I'll leave out the comments and probably share with the presenters later on. But I would like to ask a few questions. Maybe
please, one major question, because I'm running out of time.
Yes. I think from the presentations, I see a few important things missing. And the characterization of the movement itself as a ruler-based movement. I think a couple of the presenters mentioned that. I was just wondering why, in fact, it's just ruler, since most of these activities actually started and took place in cities in Oromia, unless we consider Ambo or Nekamte or Awadai, all these places as ruler. I think started. So I think I want the presenters to explain that, and the ruler link of the organization, as well as its link to the opposition political, the Oromo organization, a political organization, and the question of Infinne, for example, as the major triggering factor, which is an urban. So I just have some concerns, and I want the presenters to explain this. In fact, the lack of active voice, with the exception of Dr. Milkesa, is a little bit of a concern. I think it would have been nice if we could find at least one of the participants in the leadership of this Oromo movement. So that's, I think, for the moment, I just would like to show out this, and maybe if they can react to it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Guluma. Workine, one brief question.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, the organizers and the presenters. for the great presentation. My question was for Iskel and Mulkesa, but now it is open for all of you. Thank you again for explaining the complex political issues we are facing in the Horn of Africa. My question is, given all those failures, you pointed what happened in 1974, 91, 2018, is there any hope for a genuine and comprehensive political solution that the Oromos can still expect from Ethiopia, especially in the context of the current political crisis? What do you think will be the best and realistic scholarly advice that you can offer to achieve the peace, stability, respect, and prosperity that we wish for Oromos and other nations and nationalities of the Horn of Africa? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I will not give much time now for the response because of the pressure of time. Mulkesa, Boni, just one minute brief reflection on the two questions raised, please. Mulkesa.
Okay. So
the first question was how the rural linkage and whether that was linked to the opposition political parties, which are mainly also rural based. And the second question is, what is the hope for building? That goes actually to the next panel as well, but just reflect briefly.
Yeah, the Oromo Protest and the Oromo Nonviolent Youth Movement was not rural. It was not, it was generally the Oromia's movement. It was rural, it was urban, it was peasant, it was farmers, it was teachers. Merchants joined. Even we say youth just for presentation purpose, everyone has joined the movement, and therefore it has rural urban linkage and it covered. And yeah, the central question was the fulfillment question. I agree with that, and so I don't have any difference with that. And as a person from the government internal observatory person, my hope for comprehensive agreement or national dialogue with the current ruling party is pessimist rather. And then I don't know how to explain that, but my hope is that they are very much equipped with their conspiracy theories, and therefore I don't have hope in that sense. Thank you.
Okay, Bonnie, brief reflection.
I would just respond to Gunuma by saying this is one of the issues that we can raise in a comprehensive data collection. The focus on rural was the focus on land, and the fact that even though these are educated and in the city, most of the participants were raised in a rural area, had connections, complete a comprehension of what was at stake, making it distinct from many of the other movements it could be compared with. And we will go hopefully during the later sessions more into that, but I think it's to be determined.
Yeah, thank you very much, panelists. Sorry for those who are raising hands, but please keep your question for the next round as well, because we can also respond during that session. Now I hand over to Marilyn to moderate the next panel. Thank you very much.